He spent the night chasing a thrill he thought meant nothing. But when Ethan Carter pushed open the door of his Manhattan penthouse at 6:12 that morning, he walked into a silence so deep it felt wrong. The city outside was already alive, the distant growl of traffic rising from 5th Avenue 11 stories below, but inside the apartment the air was still and cold. No kettle humming in the kitchen. No soft lullaby drifting from the nursery. No tiny cry from the 2-week-old son who had changed their lives only days ago. Ethan tossed his keys onto the marble counter and loosened his tie, distracted, expecting Lily to appear around the corner the way she always did, her hair messy, the baby balanced gently against her shoulder. But no one came. The quiet stretched longer than it should have, and something in his chest tightened. He moved down the hallway, the polished hardwood cool beneath his shoes, the morning light sliding through tall windows and painting pale gold across the walls. "Lily," he called once, casually at first, his voice echoing too loudly in the empty space. No answer. The nursery door was half open. Ethan pushed it wider and froze. The crib was empty. The pale blue blanket that usually wrapped around their son was gone. The mobile above the crib hung perfectly still, tiny silver stars catching the sunlight, but never moving. For a moment Ethan simply stood there, his mind refusing to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Lily must be downstairs, he told himself. Maybe she took Noah for a walk. Maybe she went out for coffee. But Lily never left the apartment without telling him, not with a newborn barely 14 days old. A strange chill slid down his spine. He turned and walked quickly into the master bedroom. One side of the closet stood open. Several hangers were empty. Lily's overnight bag was gone. The dresser drawer where she kept Noah's spare clothes had been carefully cleared, not rushed, not chaotic, but deliberate. Ethan felt his heartbeat begin to pound harder as he returned to the kitchen. That was when he noticed the envelope resting in the center of the marble island. His name written across the front in Lily's familiar handwriting. He stared at it for several seconds before opening it, as if some part of him already knew that. Whatever was inside would change everything. The note was short. Just one line. "You chose your life. Now I'm choosing mine." Ethan read the sentence again and again, the words somehow growing heavier each time. Outside, a police siren wailed somewhere far downtown, fading into the noise of the waking city, but inside the penthouse the silence returned, thicker than before. Lily was gone. Their newborn son was gone. And the terrifying realization slowly settled into Ethan Carter's chest like a weight made of stone. This wasn't a moment of anger. This wasn't a dramatic exit. Lily hadn't stormed out. She had planned this. Carefully. Quietly. Completely. And the most frightening part of all was the one thought Ethan could not escape. If she had vanished without a trace, where in the world had she gone? The note trembled slightly between Ethan Carter's fingers, although he did not remember his hands beginning to shake. The kitchen around him felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if the penthouse he had lived in for years had turned into someone else's home overnight. Morning sunlight spilled across the white marble island and reflected sharply against the chrome appliances, yet the brightness only made the silence heavier. Lily was gone. The words repeated in his mind, but refused to settle into something real. Ethan grabbed his phone from his pocket and dialed her number immediately. The call rang once, twice, 3 times before the automated voice calmly informed him that the number was not available. His stomach tightened. Lily never turned her phone off. Not since the baby had been born. Especially not with a newborn barely 2 weeks old. He tried again, pacing across the kitchen floor as the call failed a second time. Then he opened his messages and typed quickly, "Where are you?" The message showed delivered, but there was no response. The quiet stretched again, pressing against his ears. Ethan walked quickly through the apartment as if Lily might suddenly appear from another room and laugh at the misunderstanding. The guest bedroom was empty. The balcony doors were locked. The bathroom counters were cleared except for a single hair tie Lily had forgotten beside the sink. Every small detail felt wrong in a way he could not fully explain. Lily was careful with everything. She liked routines, lists, plans written neatly in her notebook beside the bed. She was not impulsive. She did not disappear. Ethan returned to the nursery and stood beside the empty crib again. The faint scent of baby lotion still lingered in the air, warm and soft, a reminder of how recently their son had slept there. Just yesterday evening Noah had been curled in that blanket, his tiny fingers gripping Lily's sleeve while she rocked him slowly by the window. The memory flashed through Ethan's mind with uncomfortable clarity. He had barely looked up from his laptop when she spoke to him. Lily had stood quietly in the doorway of his office, exhaustion written across her face. Noah had been fussing, his small cry echoing softly through the hallway. Ethan remembered the exact words she said. "I think he might have a fever. Can you come check on him for a minute?" He had not even turned around. "I have a call in 10 minutes, he had replied. "Just give him some of the medicine the doctor mentioned." Lily had stood there another second, waiting for something more. Concern. Attention. Anything. But Ethan had already returned to his screen. Now the memory settled into his chest like a stone. Ethan looked again at the empty crib and then at the small stuffed bear sitting in the corner. The room felt frozen in time except for the one thing that mattered most. The baby was gone. His phone buzzed suddenly in his hand, and Ethan looked down quickly, a flicker of hope rising in his chest. But it was only a calendar reminder for a board meeting scheduled at 9:30 that morning. Ethan stared at the notification in disbelief before swiping it away. Somewhere across the city, millions of people were beginning their normal routines. Coffee shops opening, subway trains filling with commuters, traffic crawling along the avenues. But inside the Carter penthouse, nothing was normal anymore. Lily had not left in anger. She had not left in chaos. She had left quietly, carefully, and completely. And for the first time since their son was born, Ethan Carter realized that he had absolutely no idea where his wife had gone. The quiet inside the penthouse began to feel unbearable, as if the walls themselves were pressing closer with every passing minute. Ethan Carter stood in the center of the living room, staring at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the early morning sun reflecting off glass towers across Midtown. But the view that once made him feel powerful now felt strangely distant. Somewhere out there, millions of people were starting their day as usual, yet his own life had suddenly fallen into a silence he could not control. He checked his phone again and dialed Lily's number one more time, even though he already knew what he would hear. The same calm, automated message answered him. The number was unavailable. Ethan lowered the phone slowly and tried to think clearly. Lily had taken the baby. She must have gone somewhere safe. Somewhere familiar. He opened his contacts and called the first person he could think of, Lily's older sister Hannah in Boston. The phone rang several times before a sleepy voice finally answered. Hannah sounded confused when Ethan asked if Lily had arrived there overnight. There was a pause on the line, long enough for Ethan to hear a dog barking faintly in the background. Then Hannah said she had not heard from Lily in weeks. The answer landed heavily in Ethan's chest. After the call ended, he tried another number, Lily's college friend Rebecca in Brooklyn. No one had seen her. No one knew anything. Each conversation ended the same way, polite confusion followed by silence. Ethan placed the phone down on the kitchen counter and ran a hand through his hair, feeling a pressure building behind his eyes that he had not felt in years. Lily had not simply left for a visit. She had disappeared carefully enough that no one around him seemed to know where she had gone. He walked back toward the bedroom slowly and noticed something new on the nightstand beside Lily's side of the bed. Her small leather notebook was still there, the one she used every day to write reminders and lists. Ethan picked it up and opened the first page expecting to see grocery notes or pediatric appointments. Instead, he found the pages completely blank. Lily had taken the written plans with her. The realization made the situation feel even more deliberate. She had prepared for this, not in a moment of anger, but with quiet intention. Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to remember the past few weeks clearly. The hospital room when Noah was born. Lily's tired smile as she held the baby for the first time. The way she had looked at Ethan then, as if hoping the new life they created together might somehow bring them closer again. At the time, he had believed everything would simply return to normal once work slowed down. Now that memory carried a weight he had ignored before. Ethan looked toward the empty side of the room and finally understood something that had been quietly building for years without him noticing. Lily had not left overnight. She had been leaving slowly for a long time. And somewhere in the vast city beyond the glass windows, she was now beginning a life that no longer included him. The morning continued to move forward without Lily, and the absence of her quiet presence made every corner of the penthouse feel strangely hollow. Ethan Carter remained seated on the edge of the bed for several minutes, the small leather notebook resting loosely in his hands while the sounds of the city filtered faintly through the glass walls of the apartment. A distant car horn echoed far below, followed by the rumble of a delivery truck stopping somewhere on the avenue. Yet inside the room, nothing changed. The empty space beside him, where Lily once slept, seemed larger than it had ever been before. Ethan slowly stood and walked toward the window, looking down at the streets nearly 11 stories below. Morning commuters moved quickly along the sidewalks, coffee cups in their hands, their lives continuing without interruption. For the first time, he noticed how different Lily's world had been from his own. While he had spent his days inside conference rooms and offices discussing investments and expansion plans, Lily had spent most of her time inside this apartment caring for a newborn child who depended entirely on her. Ethan pressed his palm lightly against the cool glass and tried to remember the last real conversation they had shared. Not a passing comment or a quick response between phone calls, but a genuine conversation where he had listened to her completely. The answer did not come easily. His mind drifted back several months to a quiet evening when Lily had asked him if they could spend more time together before the baby arrived. She had been sitting at the kitchen island, gently turning a glass of water in her hands, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. She had said that everything felt like it was moving too fast, that she was nervous about becoming a mother while he seemed busier than ever. Ethan had responded without looking up from his tablet, assuring her that things would slow down eventually. At the time it had sounded reasonable to him. Now that memory carried a different tone, one he had ignored in the moment. Ethan stepped away from the window and walked slowly back into the nursery once more. The sunlight had shifted slightly since earlier, falling across the empty crib and illuminating the small rocking chair near the corner of the room. Lily had spent countless hours there during the past 2 weeks, quietly humming while she held Noah close against her shoulder. Ethan could almost hear the soft rhythm of the chair moving back and forth, the gentle creak of wood against the floor. The image lingered in his mind long enough to create a strange ache in his chest. He realized that Lily had been asking for help in small ways he had never fully noticed. Not through arguments or dramatic confrontations, but through quiet pauses and patient waiting. And each time he had responded with distraction or delay. Ethan reached down and picked up the tiny stuffed bear from beside the crib, turning it slowly in his hands. The soft fabric was still warm from the sunlight, but the room itself felt colder than before. Somewhere beyond the walls of the penthouse, Lily Carter was now beginning a completely different chapter of her life with their son, and the unsettling truth settled into Ethan's thoughts like a shadow he could not escape. She had not only left their home. She had stepped away from the version of their marriage that he had taken for granted for far too long. The quiet inside the nursery lingered long after Ethan Carter set the small stuffed bear back beside the empty crib. The apartment around him felt larger than it ever had before, every room echoing faintly with the absence of the two people who had quietly shaped its rhythm. He stepped into the hallway and paused, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant movement of traffic outside. Those small sounds were the only reminders that time was still moving forward. Ethan walked slowly back into the living room and glanced at the large digital clock on the wall. It was already 8:43 in the morning. In less than an hour, he was supposed to be sitting in a conference room downtown presenting quarterly projections to a group of investors. Normally, he would already be reviewing notes or answering messages from his assistant. Today, the thought of spreadsheets and presentations felt almost unreal. His phone vibrated again in his hand, and this time the screen displayed the name Vanessa Blake. Ethan stared at the notification for several seconds without answering. The message preview appeared beneath her name. "Are you awake yet? Last night was fun." The words remained on the screen like a quiet accusation. Ethan felt a tight discomfort settle in his chest as he slowly locked the phone without replying. The memory of the previous night returned with sudden clarity. The late dinner in a softly lit restaurant, the casual laughter, the feeling of temporary escape from the pressure of work and responsibility. At the time it had felt harmless, another distraction in a life filled with obligations. Now that same memory felt strangely hollow. While he had been enjoying a moment of convenience, Lily had been at home alone with their newborn son. Ethan lowered himself into the chair near the window and rested his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor while the truth settled deeper into his thoughts. Lily had not confronted him about Vanessa. She had never raised her voice or demanded explanations. In fact, she had been unusually quiet during the past few weeks, moving through the apartment gently while caring for Noah and keeping the household calm. Ethan had mistaken that silence for acceptance, maybe even gratitude for the comfortable life he provided. Now he understood that her silence had meant something entirely different. It had been distance, the quiet separation of someone slowly stepping away from a relationship that no longer felt secure. Ethan lifted his head and looked again toward the nursery down the hallway. The sunlight had shifted once more, casting long golden lines across the floorboards. Somewhere out in the city, Lily was holding their son, protecting him, beginning a path Ethan could not yet see. A heavy realization finally settled into place inside his mind. This morning had not been the sudden beginning of a crisis. It had simply been the moment he finally noticed that the life he believed was stable had already begun to change long before he woke up. The apartment remained quiet long after Ethan Carter set his phone down on the glass coffee table. The city outside continued its restless rhythm, distant sirens rising and fading, taxis honking far below, but inside the penthouse the silence had begun to feel almost personal. Ethan leaned back slowly in the chair by the window and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his thoughts. For years he had built his life around control. Meetings scheduled to the minute, contracts negotiated with precision, risks calculated before every decision. Yet nothing about this morning felt controlled. Lily had left in a way that did not fit the image he had always carried of her. She had not cried. She had not argued. She had not even asked for explanations. Instead, she had taken their newborn son and quietly stepped out of the life he believed they were building together. Ethan stood again and walked toward the kitchen, his footsteps echoing faintly against the marble floor. The note Lily had left was still resting on the counter exactly where he had placed it earlier. The simple sentence looked almost too small to hold the weight it carried. "You chose your life. Now I am choosing mine." Ethan read the line once more and tried to understand when Lily had made that decision. It could not have been only last night. The calm order of the apartment suggested planning. She had taken the baby's clothes, the stroller, the diaper bag, even the small bottle warmer that usually sat beside the crib. None of it had been rushed. Everything had been done quietly while he was somewhere else, living a completely different version of the same night. Ethan opened the refrigerator and noticed something he had not paid attention to before. The shelves were nearly empty except for a few bottles of water and a carton of milk. Lily usually kept the kitchen stocked with groceries for the week. Now it looked as if she had been slowly clearing things out, piece by piece. A quiet preparation hidden inside normal routines. Ethan closed the refrigerator door and leaned both hands against the counter, staring down at the marble surface. He tried to remember the past several days more carefully. Lily had seemed tired but calm, moving around the apartment with the quiet patience of a new mother adjusting to sleepless nights. She had not complained when he returned home late. She had not asked questions when he stepped onto the balcony to take calls. Instead, she had watched him with an expression that Ethan now realized he had misunderstood completely. It had not been trust. It had been distance forming slowly behind her eyes. Ethan lifted his head and looked toward the hallway again. The nursery door remained open, sunlight spilling softly across the floor. Somewhere beyond the skyline, Lily was holding Noah, beginning a path that no longer depended on the life Ethan had arranged for them. For the first time that morning, a different thought entered his mind, one that carried more weight than the confusion he had been feeling since he woke up. Lily had not simply disappeared. She had walked away with purpose. And if she had been preparing quietly for weeks, or maybe even months, then Ethan Carter had already lost something far more important than the quiet of an empty apartment. The quiet determination in Lily's final note lingered in Ethan Carter's mind long after he stepped away from the kitchen counter. He moved slowly through the apartment again, but this time he was no longer searching for signs that she might still be there. Instead, he was noticing the details she had left behind. The living room looked exactly as it always had, the wide gray sofa facing the tall windows that framed the skyline of Manhattan, the glass coffee table perfectly aligned on the rug. Yet the room felt strangely incomplete. The small woven basket Lily used to keep beside the sofa for baby blankets was gone. The folded burp cloth that had rested over the arm of the chair yesterday was missing as well. Each small absence formed a quiet pattern that Ethan had failed to notice before. Lily had not rushed through the night, gathering things in panic. She had been preparing carefully, selecting what she needed, and leaving behind only what belonged to the life she was ready to leave. Ethan walked back toward the hallway and paused beside the entry closet. He opened the door and saw that the stroller was gone. The small travel carrier that clipped into the back seat of their car was missing too. For a moment he closed his eyes and pictured Lily moving quietly through the apartment hours earlier while the city slept. He imagined her lifting Noah gently from the crib, wrapping him in the soft blue blanket, checking the hallway to make sure everything remained silent. The image felt so vivid that Ethan almost believed he could hear the faint rustle of fabric and the soft creak of the nursery floorboards. But the apartment remained completely still. Ethan stepped into the nursery again and rested his hand lightly against the edge of the crib. The wood felt cool beneath his fingers. Just yesterday evening Lily had been sitting in the rocking chair near the window, whispering softly to Noah while the sunset painted the walls in warm amber light. Ethan had passed by the door without stopping, answering messages on his phone as he walked toward his office. At the time it had seemed like another ordinary moment in a busy day. Now that memory replayed with an uncomfortable clarity. Lily had looked up when he walked past. She had not spoken, but her eyes had followed him down the hallway, as if she had been hoping he might pause for a second and step into the room. Ethan remembered that expression now with painful precision. It had not been anger. It had been something quieter. A silent question that he had not taken the time to answer. Ethan stepped away from the crib and slowly crossed the room. The rocking chair stood motionless in the corner, its curved wooden runners resting perfectly still on the floor. Outside the tall windows the city continued to brighten as morning fully arrived, sunlight reflecting from neighboring buildings and filling the nursery with a soft glow. Somewhere beyond that skyline Lily Carter was carrying their son through streets Ethan could not see, moving farther away from the life he believed they shared. And as Ethan stood alone in the quiet room, he finally understood a truth that felt impossible to ignore. Lily had not left because of a single moment or a single mistake. She had left because the distance between them had been growing quietly for so long that by the time Ethan noticed it, she was already gone. The sunlight in the nursery had grown brighter by the time Ethan Carter finally stepped back into the hallway, but the warmth of the morning did little to ease the quiet pressure building in his chest. The apartment that once felt like a symbol of success now felt strangely hollow, as if the space itself had lost its purpose overnight. Ethan walked slowly toward the living room again, his eyes moving across the familiar objects that filled the penthouse. The tall bookshelf near the corner still held the same collection of business biographies and investment manuals he had proudly displayed for years. The framed photographs on the console table still showed moments from a life that now felt distant. One photo captured a weekend in Napa Valley 2 summers earlier, when Ethan and Lily stood side by side in soft golden sunlight, both smiling easily at the camera. At the time the future had felt simple and secure. Ethan reached for the frame and held it in his hands, studying the quiet happiness on Lily's face in the picture. She had been looking at him, not at the camera, her expression full of trust. That memory lingered for a moment before the silence of the apartment pulled him back into the present. Ethan set the photograph down and walked toward the wide balcony doors. When he stepped outside, the air carried the crisp brightness of a late New York morning. The city stretched endlessly in every direction, rows of buildings reflecting sunlight like thousands of small mirrors. From this height the streets looked calm and orderly, but Ethan knew how chaotic the city could become once the day fully unfolded. Somewhere in that vast maze of neighborhoods and avenues Lily was now moving through the world with their newborn son. The thought created a strange tension between worry and admiration that Ethan could not easily explain. Lily had always seemed gentle and patient, the kind of person who preferred quiet evenings at home over crowded restaurants or loud parties. Yet the way she had left suggested a strength he had never fully recognized. She had not depended on anyone to help her walk away. She had simply made a decision and followed through with it. Ethan rested both hands on the balcony railing and closed his eyes for a moment as the breeze moved lightly across his face. In the distance he could hear the faint rumble of a subway train passing beneath the city, followed by the rhythmic pulse of construction equipment somewhere farther down the avenue. Life continued to move forward whether he was ready for it or not. When Ethan opened his eyes again, he looked out across the skyline with a new understanding slowly forming in his thoughts. For years he had believed that success meant building a life that others would admire, a life measured by career growth and financial stability. But standing alone on the balcony now, the empty apartment behind him and the endless city ahead, he realized that something far more personal had slipped quietly beyond his reach. Lily had taken their son and stepped into a future Ethan had never imagined she would choose alone. And somewhere deep inside his thoughts another realization began to take shape, one that carried a quiet urgency he could no longer ignore. If Lily had been strong enough to walk away without a word, then finding her again might require Ethan Carter to become someone very different from the man he had been until this morning. The wind on the balcony carried the distant rhythm of the city, but Ethan Carter no longer felt connected to the view that had once made him proud of everything he had built. After several quiet minutes, he stepped back inside the apartment and closed the glass door behind him, the soft click echoing through the empty living room. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Ethan walked slowly toward the kitchen counter, where Lily's note still rested exactly where he had left it. The words had not changed, yet they seemed to carry more meaning every time he read them. You chose your life. Now I am choosing mine. Ethan leaned against the counter and looked down at the message again, replaying the past 24 hours in his mind with a clarity that had not existed earlier that morning. The previous evening returned piece by piece. The quiet dinner invitation from Vanessa Blake, the way he had told Lily he needed to meet a client downtown, the moment Lily nodded calmly while holding Noah against her shoulder. She had not questioned him. She had simply smiled faintly and said she hoped his meeting went well. At the time, Ethan had interpreted that calm response as trust. Now it felt like something entirely different. Lily had already been preparing to leave. Ethan straightened slowly and walked toward the entryway again. His eyes moved toward the security panel beside the door, something he had barely noticed before. The building used a digital system that logged every entry and exit through the private elevator. Ethan tapped the screen and scrolled through the activity record from the night before. The timestamps appeared one after another until his eyes stopped on a line recorded just after 3:30 in the morning. Private elevator departure. Ethan stared at the time for several seconds. 3:32 a.m. That meant Lily had left while the city was still quiet, long before sunrise. The thought formed a clear image in his mind. Lily standing in the softly lit hallway, the baby carrier resting gently against her chest. Noah sleeping peacefully inside, while she pressed the elevator button with steady hands. No dramatic farewell. No final argument. Just a silent decision carried out while the world slept. Ethan stepped away from the screen and looked toward the empty hallway once more. Somewhere in the city, Lily had already traveled miles away from this apartment. She could be in a taxi crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, or walking along a quiet street in another borough, or even leaving Manhattan entirely. The possibilities stretched across the map of New York like an endless puzzle. Ethan picked up his phone again and opened the map application, staring at the glowing grid of streets that filled the screen. For the first time that morning, a different kind of determination began to rise beneath the confusion he had been feeling since sunrise. Lily had left quietly, but she had not vanished into thin air. She had taken a route through a city of 8 million people, a city filled with cameras, trains, bridges, and roads that connected every neighborhood. Somewhere along that path there would be a clue, a small detail she had not expected him to notice. Ethan Carter looked down at the map again and understood something with sudden certainty. If Lily had been strong enough to walk away without looking back, then finding her again would require more than regret. It would require him to finally pay attention to the life he had ignored for far too long. The glowing map on Ethan Carter's phone illuminated the quiet kitchen as he studied the network of streets stretching across New York City. The blue lines of highways and the pale gray grid of neighborhoods looked almost orderly on the screen, but Ethan knew the city itself was anything but simple. 8 million people moved through those streets every day, disappearing into subways, taxis, and office towers without leaving a trace. Somewhere within that endless motion, Lily was carrying their newborn son through a morning that Ethan had not even known was beginning. Ethan zoomed in slowly on the map, his eyes scanning the neighborhoods closest to the apartment. Lily did not drive often in Manhattan, and she rarely used ride services late at night. If she had left at 3:30 in the morning with a newborn baby, she would have chosen something quiet and dependable. The subway lines appeared like colored threads across the screen, but Ethan quickly dismissed that possibility. Lily would never take a crowded train with a 2-week-old infant. That left only a few options: a taxi, a car service, or someone she trusted enough to pick her up. Ethan set the phone down and walked back toward the entryway, where the security panel still glowed softly beside the elevator doors. The building prided itself on privacy, but every vehicle that entered the underground garage was logged for security reasons. Ethan opened the panel again and navigated to the overnight activity records. A list of license plates appeared with timestamps stretching through the early hours of the morning. Delivery trucks, a cleaning service van, a black sedan registered to one of the residents on the 12th floor. Ethan continued scrolling until one entry made him pause. 3:37 a.m., yellow cab entry. The time was only 5 minutes after the elevator record he had seen earlier. Ethan leaned closer to the screen, his pulse quickening slightly as the pieces began to form a clearer picture. Lily had taken the elevator down with Noah. She had stepped outside the building just before dawn while the city was still quiet. And within minutes a taxi had pulled into the garage entrance to pick someone up. The realization spread through Ethan's thoughts like a sudden spark of clarity. Lily had not wandered through the city looking for direction. She had arranged her departure carefully enough to move quickly and disappear before anyone noticed she was gone. Ethan reached for his phone again and opened the camera application, taking a quick photograph of the license plate information displayed on the screen. The small detail might not reveal much on its own, but it was the first real trace Lily had left behind since the moment she walked out of the apartment. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket and stepped away from the panel, his mind already moving ahead to the next question. Where had that taxi taken her? New York was a city of 5 boroughs, hundreds of neighborhoods, and thousands of streets where someone could begin a completely new life without ever being recognized again. But Lily had left with a newborn child and a limited amount of time before sunrise. She could not have traveled far without planning the destination long before that elevator door closed behind her. Ethan Carter stood quietly in the hallway of the silent penthouse and felt a new kind of determination settle into place inside his chest. For the first time since waking up that morning, he was no longer standing in confusion. Somewhere beyond the glass towers and crowded avenues of the city, there was a place Lily had chosen as the beginning of her new path. And now that Ethan had found the first clue she had unknowingly left behind, the search for that place had officially begun. The photograph of the taxi license plate remained open on Ethan Carter's phone as he stood quietly in the hallway of the silent penthouse, the glow of the screen reflecting faintly across the polished floor. For a moment, he simply stared at the numbers, repeating them in his mind as if they were coordinates leading somewhere important. Outside the windows, the morning had fully arrived, sunlight stretching across the neighboring buildings and spilling into the apartment with an almost indifferent brightness. The city was awake now, millions of people already moving through their routines, unaware that somewhere among them a young mother was beginning a completely different life. Ethan walked slowly back into the living room and sat down at the edge of the sofa, holding the phone loosely in his hand while his thoughts moved carefully through the possibilities. Lily had always been organized, someone who prepared quietly before making any serious decision. If she had arranged a taxi in advance, she must have also chosen a destination long before she stepped into that elevator. Ethan opened his contacts and hesitated for a moment before selecting a familiar name. Marcus Hale. Marcus had been his closest friend since college and now worked as a transportation consultant who often collaborated with city data networks. If anyone could trace a taxi through the maze of New York traffic, it would be him. The phone rang twice before Marcus answered with a surprised tone in his voice. Ethan rarely called him this early. Ethan explained the situation carefully, leaving out certain details, but sharing the one fact that mattered. Lily had left in a yellow cab at 3:37 in the morning. Marcus listened quietly before asking Ethan to send the photograph of the license plate. A moment later, the image disappeared from Ethan's screen as the message delivered. Marcus promised he would check the taxi registry and the digital trip records used by most cab companies across the city. When the call ended, Ethan set the phone down on the table and leaned back against the sofa cushions. The apartment still felt unfamiliar without the soft background sounds that Lily and Noah had brought into every room. Even the light seemed different, falling across the floor in wide golden stripes that highlighted how still everything had become. Ethan's mind drifted again to the moment Lily had stood in the doorway of his office the night before. The baby had been restless in her arms, his tiny hands gripping the fabric of her sleeve while she spoke quietly about a possible fever. Ethan had answered without turning away from his screen. At the time, the conversation had lasted no more than 10 seconds. Now it replayed in his thoughts with a strange clarity. It had been the last moment they spoke before Lily made the decision to leave. Ethan looked toward the hallway again, imagining the quiet determination it must have taken for her to gather their son and walk away from the life they had built together. Somewhere beyond the towers and crowded avenues of Manhattan, Lily Carter was moving forward with a calm purpose that Ethan was only beginning to understand. The silence of the apartment pressed gently around him as he waited for Marcus to call back. And for the first time since sunrise, Ethan felt the faint beginning of something that had been missing all morning. Not certainty, not control, but the fragile possibility that the path Lily had taken might soon reveal its first destination. The quiet waiting stretched longer than Ethan Carter expected. Nearly 20 minutes passed before his phone finally vibrated on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with Marcus Hale's name. Ethan answered immediately. Marcus sounded more alert now, his voice carrying the focused tone he used when analyzing complicated data. He explained that most yellow taxis in New York logged their routes digitally through a city network that recorded pickup points and final destinations. The license plate Ethan had sent matched a cab that began its shift shortly before 3 in the morning in Midtown. At 3:37, the driver accepted a pickup request near Ethan's building. Marcus paused for a moment while scrolling through the trip record on his screen. Then he spoke again with quiet certainty. The ride lasted 28 minutes and ended in Brooklyn. Ethan sat forward slowly, his attention sharpening with every word. Brooklyn was enormous, a borough filled with dozens of neighborhoods and millions of residents. Yet it was still the first clear direction he had heard all morning. Marcus continued explaining that the final stop appeared near a residential area close to Prospect Park. The driver had marked the trip as completed just after 4 in the morning. Ethan thanked him quietly before ending the call and setting the phone down again. For a moment he remained still, letting the new information settle in his mind. Lily had crossed the East River while the city was still dark, leaving Manhattan behind before sunrise. The image formed vividly in Ethan's thoughts. A yellow taxi moving through empty streets, the baby carrier resting securely beside her, Noah sleeping peacefully as the car crossed the bridge with the skyline fading slowly behind them. Ethan stood up and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the city. From this height, he could see the distant outline of the Brooklyn Bridge stretching across the water like a thin silver thread. The borough on the other side had always felt separate from his daily routine, a different pace of life from the polished towers of Manhattan. Yet Lily had chosen that direction with clear intention. Ethan rested his hand lightly against the glass and watched the sunlight reflecting across the river. Prospect Park appeared in his memory as a quiet green space surrounded by brownstone streets and small cafes, the kind of neighborhood Lily had always preferred when they occasionally visited on weekends. It was calmer there, less hurried than the financial district where Ethan spent most of his days. The realization settled gently but firmly into his thoughts. Lily had not chosen a random place to disappear. She had gone somewhere that felt peaceful, somewhere she believed she could start again without the noise of the life she had left behind. Ethan stepped away from the window and picked up his phone once more. The map application opened instantly, displaying the borough of Brooklyn with its wide avenues and tree-lined blocks surrounding the park. Somewhere within that quiet neighborhood, Lily Carter was holding their son and beginning the first morning of a completely new chapter. Ethan looked at the map carefully, studying the streets as if they were pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. The distance between them was no longer a mystery stretching across an entire city. It had narrowed to a single borough, a park, and the quiet neighborhoods that surrounded it. And for the first time since the moment he discovered the empty crib, Ethan Carter understood that the path leading to Lily and their son had become real enough to follow. The map of Brooklyn remained open on Ethan Carter's phone as he stood near the window, the quiet apartment behind him and the vast city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. The sunlight had climbed higher now, turning the river into a wide ribbon of silver between Manhattan and the borough where Lily had gone. Ethan studied the streets around Prospect Park again, tracing the curved outline of the green space with his eyes. The neighborhood surrounding it looked calm on the screen, filled with narrow tree-lined blocks and old brownstone buildings that carried the quiet charm Lily had always admired. For a moment Ethan simply stood there imagining the path her taxi must have taken after crossing the bridge. The car turning onto smaller streets, the early morning sky beginning to lighten while most of the city still slept. Lily stepping out onto a quiet sidewalk with Noah in her arms, the baby carrier resting gently against her chest while she looked around at the unfamiliar neighborhood she had chosen as the beginning of something new. Ethan lowered the phone slowly and walked back into the nursery one final time. The sunlight filled the small room now, touching the empty crib and the rocking chair that had been Lily's place during long nights with their newborn son. The stillness of the room felt different than it had earlier that morning. At first the silence had been confusing and unsettling. Now it carried a quiet understanding that Ethan could not ignore. Lily had not run away out of fear or anger. She had walked towards something she believed would be better for their child. Ethan stepped closer to the crib and rested his hand lightly against the wooden rail. For the first time since discovering the empty room, he allowed himself to picture Lily and Noah somewhere safe, perhaps sitting beside a window in a small apartment near the park, sunlight warming the floor, while Noah slept peacefully in her arms. The thought did not erase the weight in Ethan's chest, but it replaced some of the confusion with a deeper sense of clarity. He finally understood that Lily had made her decision with calm determination, not as an act of revenge, but as a step toward a life she believed would give their son something different from the one Ethan had been living. Ethan looked around the nursery slowly, taking in every detail as if committing the room to memory. The tiny stuffed bear beside the crib. The folded blanket Lily had chosen weeks earlier while preparing for Noah's arrival. These small objects represented a life that had quietly changed direction while Ethan had been too distracted to notice. When he stepped back into the hallway, the apartment felt larger than before, the echo of his footsteps traveling through rooms that no longer held the same meaning. Ethan returned to the living room and picked up his phone again, the map of Brooklyn still glowing softly on the screen. Prospect Park, a place Lily had visited several times during the past year when she needed a break from the noise of Manhattan. Ethan had always assumed those quiet walks meant little more than a simple change of scenery. Now he understood that Lily had been searching for something peaceful long before this morning arrived. Ethan Carter looked once more toward the skyline outside the window and felt a calm but undeniable truth settle into his thoughts. Somewhere beyond the river, Lily was beginning the first chapter of a life that no longer depended on him. And for the first time since sunrise, Ethan realized that finding her again would not only mean crossing the distance between two boroughs. It would mean becoming the kind of man she might one day allow back into that new life.